If there is one guy that we still have no idea where he'll be employed in the future, that has to be Daniel Ricciardo. After the buyout agreement with McLaren, the Aussie has been left without a seat for the 2023 season and is looking forward to changing this narrative, as not many teams are willing to sign him in their rows. Still, it seems like his former boss does have high praise for Ricciardo, although he left them with a bittersweet note in 2018, as Christian Horner said some interesting things when it comes to Ricciardo's future. On top of that, another ex-F1 champion spoke about Ricciardo's chances of signing with Alpine, and a little spoiler alert, he wasn't as kind as Horner. Want to find out more? Stick around with us until the end of this video. Now that we're certain that Ricciardo won't drive for McLaren, let's dive a little bit into his season with a Woking-based team so that you'll understand why Ricciardo is having a hard time finding a new team. Ricciardo joined McLaren in 2021 after finishing P5 in 2020 with Renault, and the expectations were that McLaren would keep the P3 spot in the championship and fight with both of its drivers for this accomplishment, similar to what it did in 2020. However, Ricciardo's only highlight of 2021 was the impressive win in Monza, with Norris following at P2 and completing a dominant weekend for McLaren in Italy. Apart from that, 2021 wasn't anything spectacular to the Aussie, as he finished it with 115 points, 45 points less than his teammate Norris. The team decided that one season isn't enough to showcase Ricciardo's possibilities, but they were in for a bad surprise in 2022. The Aussie has been nowhere near the same driver in the season, gathering only 19 points with 6 races remaining on the calendar. His teammate is the sole reason why the team is fighting with Alpine for the P4 spot in the championship, as Norris is currently sitting at P7 with 88 points. This is why McLaren decided to move away from the regressing form of Ricciardo and agreed to buy out terms. And this is why he's having a hard time finding a new team for the upcoming season. However, according to a former boss of his, Christian Horner, Ricciardo's slump of form isn't enough proof to see him out of the sport, and he doesn't understand why Alpine hasn't signed Ricciardo yet. After all, this is the team that Ricciardo scored a couple of podiums back in 2020, and he does understand how that car works. Plus, as Rossi, the CEO of Alpine, said, they were looking for a driver that is ready to grow with them, so the perfect solution could be found in Ricciardo. Horner said, "I think I probably would go with Ricciardo, to be honest with you. They obviously know him from a couple of seasons ago, and he was very together during his last season there, scoring podiums, and I think he's the type of guy that I think you could rebuild him." It's obviously not been a great experience for him at McLaren for whatever reason, but you just have to think back to some of the drives that he did for us, some of the wins he had, the podiums, some of the stunning overtakes he was capable of. That's still there, I'm sure. He just needs a bit of a reset. You don't just forget how to deliver, so I hope for him he gets another opportunity and gets himself back on the grid for next year. Finished Horner. You have to understand that Ricciardo was one of the hottest prospects of Red Bull, but it seems like the turbo hybrid era that was dominated by Mercedes and the arrival of Verstappen, who is a generational talent, have been too much for the Aussie to stay in this team and prove his worth. That is why he decided to leave Red Bull in 2018, and although he's had a couple of decent seasons in Renault, Ricciardo hasn't been the same driver ever since he left Red Bull. There is a huge difference between the Red Bull and Renault F1 cars compared to the McLaren one, which is why Ricciardo's driving style isn't allowing him to score nice results. On the other hand, Norris did say that the car suited Ricciardo more at the beginning of the season, but it seems like the Aussie hasn't been able to capitalize on this opportunity. Nevertheless, there is one ex-F1 champion that believes Ricciardo doesn't deserve a chance in Alpine, and when asked whether he's surprised that Alpine isn't considering Ricciardo as a substitute for the driving spot, he said, "Why would he be? He had 2 terrible years at Renault and 2 even more terrible years at McLaren. That's 4 years. Almost half of his Formula 1 career was bad. Alpine have no reason to take him, especially when he's driven there before. The modern cars just don't seem to suit his driving style." He was impressive at Red Bull. He showed amazing overtaking maneuvers. He was ahead of Max at the beginning. But in the end, Max started to get a handle on him. Then he switched, and after the switch, something seems to have happened that he never managed to get a handle on. He never recovered from that. Finished Jacques. Saying that Ricciardo had 2 terrible years in Renault is a bit of a far-fetched situation, as we all know the happy faces of the previous Renault boss, Cyril Abiteboul, when Ricciardo scored 2 podiums in 2020. The team was truly struck in the midfield, and it had no chance of fighting for podium spots, but that changed when Ricciardo came to to the team. It's a shame that they separated the way they did, but nothing much can be done here. There is also an option for Ricciardo to sit out the 2023 season and then conquer a seat from 2024 and beyond. This is something that Ricciardo himself said during the drivers' parade at the Dutch GP, but according to Jacques, that would hurt his reputation and performance even further, and it could make him lazy. As he elaborated, it could make him lazy. You can take a year off if you're an Alonso, a Schumacher, if you've been world champion and won a lot of races, if you know in the paddock you'll always be at your best no matter what season. After 4 bad years, don't do that. You take what you can get. If you have an offer to drive in Formula 1, then you take every cockpit. In public you will say you don't want to drive for one of the back teams, but if that's the only contract you can get, then you'll sign it. So what's next for Ricciardo? The Aussie does have a chance to sign with a lower performing team like Haas or Williams, but the question of whether he'll accept that big of a pay cut has to be asked first. Ricciardo is set to bank in $15 million from the buyout terms with McLaren, which is a serious amount of money even though your career is literally at a crossroads now. His name has been heavily related to Haas, but it's not something that either Steiner or Ricciardo spoke about in public, so there isn't a very high hope that this will see the daylight. On the other hand, Ricciardo doesn't want to give up on F1 in any case. He's spoken about his future, providing us with an update when it comes to what he plans on doing in the recent period, as he spoke for an Australian radio station, adding, "When I say I don't know, I don't have a contract yet for next year. Could it still happen? It could. I guess I'm not getting too caught up in next year. Of course, I want to race, I want to be on the grid, I want to be competing, but I'm not kind of seeing next year as all or nothing. Obviously, 2024 is something I want to be aware of and look at. So that's kind of where I am. Like, if it means taking a step back and then take 2 steps forward, then that's what we're trying to figure out at the moment, me and my team. So that could be a year off." Previously, Ricciardo spoke about his F1 future too, saying that he doesn't want to be too proud when it comes to accepting certain ideas or proposals that will go his way. He also said that his head is currently wrapped around either sitting around the 2023 season or accepting the reserve driver role, possibly in Mercedes, which is not something that he is working towards, but is the harsh reality of the outcome of his career so far. With that being said, it's still uncertain as to where Ricciardo will finish in the 2023 season. The bad performance in 2022 isn't helping his reputation at all, and it seems like we'll see him struggling for the remainder of the 6 races too, given the fact that he's lost all motivation to drive and to prove to other teams that he's still made out of F1 material. What do you think will happen next with the Aussie? Do you think that he does have a legit chance of landing a starting spot in 2023 in Alpine or Haas? Let us know in the comments below.